Okay, YouTube's turning on.
Cool. Okay. So, I didn't get up to that much over the weekend. Brief speedrunning update. World records down to 153. It's tied. So that's fun. Otherwise, yeah, I've basically spent the weekend doing that and not much else. But otherwise, feeling pretty good and yeah, better than last week or better than Friday.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So I know we talked last week about some debate stuff, maybe. Um, yeah, that feels pretty good. Otherwise, I saw a few of your posts on Curie.us, but I haven't read that much about them. I thought the one about the guy doing a post-mortem on LessWrong was interesting.
Oh, yeah. The guy who wasn't good at math, right?
Yeah, that was I think he's wrong about some stuff, but I think it's good that he's at least um, doing this sort of thing.
Yeah, people should definitely think about things like this. I approve of the concept.
He's a bit hard on himself though. Like I think he's feels like he's actually like lost something as opposed to gained something here.
I think he's overly impressed with the less wrong crowd.
Mm. That makes sense in terms of not being able, like he doesn't have the like knowledge or experience to be able to judge like math stuff particularly well. So it sort of makes sense that he realizes he's missing out on something but can't tell the quality particularly, or that sort of thinking in general.
It's possible the
But,
stuff he did wasn't very good, but most stuff isn't very good. It's not necessarily the fault of the field.
oh yeah,
It's
no, I
just
mean
it's pretty easy to waste your time in every field.
yeah, I think he sort of miscategorizes or thinks some stuff is like too different from the stuff he already knows. Or that like maths is like, but he seems to think that maths is like separate in some particular way, or like that sort of thinking, or whatever else, that it's somehow unique and different from other things. But I'm not sure about that. This sort of
Yeah, there's some separation.
um, I thought this was an interesting observation on his part, though. That I recently
Uh,
downloaded Brilliant, but it makes me feel anything but.
I'm not familiar with the app. Is it just like
It's like
IQ test question type things?
it's much more educationally focused. They've got different courses and stuff, but it's like a rich web-based sort of thing. So there's lots of decent like animations or clicky things or whatever else. Um, so it's quite
Right.
interactive.
Okay, so I found these debate topics. Why don't you write like a initial paragraph on the Max microblogging thread to see what you have to say about it or claim or whatever?
Yep. There was. Oh no, that's right. Oops. Do you mean the blockchain one particularly, or
No, any
all?
of them doesn't matter.
Okay, cool. Um, where did I put that? Isn't learning report. Can you copy text from my site?
Looks like it.
If you right click, like
Copy.
mine's great. That's weird. Okay, no, that one works. Okay, don't know.
Get that pasted. I am in a different browser than you.
Yeah, I think it might be like if I copied. No, seems to be fine now. Like if I copied some stuff like the dot on the left or something like that, maybe the bullet. So one of the things that the first 3 dot points I mentioned. Oh, sorry, someone's buzzing. I think that might be Mel. I'll be back in a sec.
Okay.
I was just saying before, I'm going to focus on the blockchain one because that's the only one I think I could really debate. The others are more just question stuff. It's like, oh, I need to learn more or think more about that.
I think the other ones would work okay too, but blockchain's fine.
The reason I'm hesitant about the other ones is that I don't know what I particularly think in detail. It's just I don't like agree. I'm not convinced that the I don't know, the title things are necessarily correct. Like I could see how they wouldn't be.
Yeah, that's completely reasonable to talk about, and you can ask critical questions or something if you'd like, or say, potential alternatives that you have in mind that you're not sure about.
Other
Discussion
stuff in it.
is one of the ways you can learn about things. It doesn't have to be only after you already know about a topic. Did you swap title and author?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Um, mm. I was going to post them individually. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Sweet.
I think just one at a time is fine. You can write the other ones and just save them for the moment.
Okay, cool.
Okay, responded.
I presume I'll respond in text, right?
Yeah, I think text would be better. You can chat verbally if you want to,
Yep,
but text is better for trying to get some precision.
yep, I agree. What I like, my intuition is that I uh like I'll ask questions about how I should like do things, like methodology and things, but then like the result sort of keep to text. Does that make sense?
Sure.
That feels sort of like a more or a sensible way to separate things. So when I'm like, sometimes I'm at a point at the moment where I'm not happy with wording that I'm thinking of. Um, so like I'm writing a sentence like, the hormone makes them angry or something, and I don't really want to say like makes, but I don't want to say something weak source like, increases the odds of having a negative reaction or something like that. Is this like a sign that I shouldn't be raising the point slash like don't know enough about it, or
Yeah, I'm not
um,
sure. Is it a wording issue or do you not know what concept you have in mind?
I think the wording issue is making it more obvious that I don't have a clear idea of the concept. Like, in particularly how like something like hormones interact with thoughts and stuff.
Right. I think you could just say it anyways. It's It's
Yeah, okay.
in the ballpark of a standard view.
Yeah. What's your policy, by the way, on or what do you reckon is the best? I guess if we're replying one after the other, there's no particular need to do too much quoting, right? Unless we're referring to something particularly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I've like overquoted sometimes in the past.
Overquoting's not a big deal. It's pretty harmless.
Yep.
Sometimes on F5 people quote like multiple pages that they're not responding to, but it usually doesn't come up on the website.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's the default on with email, but not on things, so it sort of makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you can just hit the quote button every time, but people usually don't.
Okay. Cool, replied.
Okay, I responded. I think it would help to write smaller chunks.
Yep. I did try and keep that down, but it's something that yeah, I'm not particularly good at.
Yeah, the other
I
thing
mean,
you can do if you're is label chunks. You can label things as this is important, this is my main question. These are extra thoughts for context, stuff like that. Because it's too much stuff to focus on all of it, and if you don't give any indicators about where to focus, then the other person is either they're going to write a million things or they're going to have to decide where to focus for you.
yep.
And you probably know
Yep.
better than them where you think what you thought was important and what you said.
Okay, so could we analyze what I said, but then also like there's one of the problems I ran into, which maybe I should have mentioned. So you asked a question sort of at the beginning that I felt like we might have needed, or I might have needed, either more clarification or something like that first. Um,
Right.
and
That's a perfectly reasonable way to respond, is just to focus on what that means and reserve responding to the other part until later.
is it reasonable to say that if like
Yeah.
I need to talk about this before I? Yep, cool. Um,
Yeah,
as
you
opposed
can
to like not.
also represent it with a tree. Um, you know, you're basically saying you have two different children for what I was saying, and then you want to start with the left one and save the right one for later.
Yeah, okay. So um, the tree being like around this question, whether it counts as a direct influence over our personality or um,
Well, a tree of the
known
entire
cause of
conversation
Oh, okay, yeah,
would have my stuff in it, and then you
yeah.
would be adding new nodes. And
And I would, so that would, yeah, okay, yeah. No, I think I've got you. Okay. So I can, yeah, if I think there's like clarifying things, then I should slash can bring that up. And, um, oh yeah, so in terms of like analyzing this, um, so one thing I realize is like the temperament thing, I could have literally just said like hormones as a causal mechanism. I didn't need to go into like like, the example of being angry is a bit superfluous. It doesn't really matter. Um,
yeah, it's fine though. It's adequately generic and standard. It's not like a specific example that's atypical, because those can cause trouble. If you use a really canonical example, it's not a big deal, usually.
um, so I think it was like I wanted to include this bottom section, and I wanted to say, I think I agree, and to sort of, um, in essence, give like either another conclusion or a rephrasing or whatever else, basically because it gives you something to check again. Like if what I said sounds reasonable, then the chance we agree is high enough to not worry about at the moment. That's my rationale behind it, at least.
Yeah, that sentence seems fine.
Um, so in terms of the size of this, besides I could just take out temperament and say hormones. Um, what makes this like too much, do you think?
It's just like there's a bunch of different things one could reply to. Like I did two sections, but I didn't even try to reply to this part. Like with unknown causal mechanisms, that's not a normal thing to speculate. Usually we don't say maybe there's something going on where we have no idea what it is, because you can do that with anything. Like it could be an unknown genetic causal mechanism, but it could also be an unknown non-genetic causal mechanism. It could be anything.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, okay.
so And further, we usually only speculate that when there's an effect and we can't figure out what is a possible cause of this effect. There are no known causes that explain it and make sense. Whereas in this case, I don't think there's like a human behavior where you say, I have no idea why he got angry, there must be some like unknown cause. Usually you can come up with, well, maybe he has certain ideas and those would cause it, and it's not too hard to come up with a known story instead of an unknown story.
Yeah. Um, the so I'm just thinking about like speculating on unknown causal mechanisms because most of the time I would agree with you without hesitation on like when people are talking about stuff. And so like evidently there's something different I think here. And I think it might be to do with not having any good like explanation of things anyway. Like we don't know how stuff works. So we're uh like we don't know the causal mechanisms for the stuff that we do understand, sort of thing. Um, so
I
it
think we have
seems
a I think we have an adequate outline. Like My
Okay.
worldview doesn't have a massive hole in it there.
Okay. All right. I'll bring that up if we go down that conversation arm.
Yeah, but so there's other stuff, like you bring up evolution here, you bring up social, you bring up static memes, social signals, in-group, out-group. So like those are a bunch of substantial topics
Yeah.
that are being brought up. Like each of those could have a long discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
And like the self-control idea is another pretty big one.
Yeah. That's why I put it in quotes, sort of to indicate that I wasn't like particularly attached to the idea, I guess, or like it's not something that I want to claim as mine or that I necessarily believe in, or that there's like, yeah, lots of other meaning. All right. I'm just gonna post this. I'm not like 100% happy with it, but it's also something where I'm not sure that working on it more is going to make it better, and I think the conclusion might be to go back to another part of the conversation tree. Is it worth saying that if I think it, by the way?
Yeah, that's fine. That seems like relevant information. I was going to suggest next that you try making a conversation tree and don't get hung up on the wording of the nodes. Very loose paraphrases or just copy pastes of stuff are fine. The point is to see the structure and organization. Does that make sense about how to do it?
I think so. This feels pretty reasonable now.
I responded. I think you should keep going with the tree though.
Sorry? I've
What?
Oh, what was that? Sorry, that I've gone off the tree.
Oh, I said I thought you should keep going with the tree as opposed to
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
responding.
Cool. I'll leave the tree up. If you want to.
I think color coding who's who would be good.
Yep. Um, oops. All right.
Okay, zoom out a bit and look at the tree. Just, I think it's notable what size it is, and also, all of the branching but one is caused by your color, and it's a fairly big tree for a fairly short discussion.
When you say a fairly big tree, we mean like width sort of thing. Depth is obviously just replies, but or that's how I've done it. But width
Yeah,
being branching. Yeah.
like it looks like there's a bunch of stuff going on, and not everything's even getting children.
Yep. Realized as well,
But
just
go ahead.
looking at this tree as an example, the the tendency that I have, and I think is somewhat common of people to like reply to like in the way that they reply to everything or reply in these chunks in uh, letters or discussions or things, means that you like never get a good chance to prune the tree. Um, you don't get to go down and see where a branch ends and come back up. You're dedicating effort to the breadth as opposed to the depth. And yeah, putting effort into the breadth only means that it's more likely you're not going to end up with any resolution, as opposed to with depth, you can at least try and get to one resolution and see how difficult that is.
Yeah, I've been discouraging people from writing many section replies for years with not that much success. Like, so the standard thing people do is they don't actually like engage with your specific text. If they quote, they often just reply at the very bottom. It doesn't really have to do with anything in particular from the quote, and those discussions are kind of awful. And they're sort of always talking about the bigger picture, and there's no detail. And so the Usenet style or whatever, email style, old school, allows responding to specific parts and using quotes, and there's big advantages there. But then people often get lost in details. And it's pretty common to see posts with like 7 sections, but none of them are a conclusion or an overall big picture.
Mm. Or it's one big overall big picture that doesn't respond to detail or to parts of the.
Yeah, that's the alternative, is to not engage with specific text. So it's often one or the other. And I think it's better to do, I think, so one of the things I've found is if you get people to quote, they often still don't engage. Like they'll just quote a sentence or a paragraph and then write like they haven't actually read it carefully or they didn't check the context before replying or something. Like they can go through the motions without actually doing it properly. So I think they need to like want to engage with text and understand what that is, and that's not a format issue. And then in terms of format, I think it's usually good to have a main point or overall response or something like that. And then you can have other sections to like add some details, like examples or minor points or whatever. And I think it's good if your sections aren't all equally important. Like, some of them are more important than others, and that doesn't always get attention.
Yeah. How, besides like not including unimportant stuff, how do you signal what's important or not? Or just explicitly stating it, I guess. Is that the best way to do
Yeah,
it?
so explicit labels are fine, but there are a lot of subtle hints you can give as well. For example, if you write some short replies intermixed, and then you write like 2 or 3 solid paragraphs at the bottom that are clearly like your overall broad comments, people will be able to figure out that like that's your main point, that's your sum up, you know. Although sometimes they'll start replying to everything before they notice that part exists.
Yeah.
So you
I
can mention like main comments at the bottom if you want to, but there's a lot of other indicators. Like sometimes people just mention that they think something's important, or like this part's a big deal to me, or I was really surprised by this part.
One thing that I'm just or I'm thinking about. Sorry, excuse me for Dick. Um, the so a thought occurs to me about the analogy between like chat and a discussion like this. Um, in that a discussion is like a branching uh, chat sort of thing. In that like each one of these could be like uh, individual messages back and forth to each other. Um, the problem with chat is that it's all in one thing, so it's difficult to keep track of all stuff. And the advantage of doing text like this is we can branch and break up and fork and things. Um, so, and I think that makes it easier to see, like to sort of see some of the issues with the way that people engage in discussion. Um, partially because, so one of the things that people like doing is writing mini essays, which is not like engaging in the thing. But when you think about it like as this sort of like pseudo chat thing, um, I mean, it's so the idea is not 100% clear to me, but it feels like there's decent sort of places to go here. Like one of them being that like with a normal essay, you have like, or a paper or whatever else, you have like your introduction at the beginning, and that gives a lot of context about what you're going to talk about and where you're going with it. And then you have the conclusion at the end. But with a discussion, then the beginning's already happened. You like start midway, so you've got just points and then a conclusion. So it's always the case that like in a discussion thing, you should expect the important stuff like like concluding things to be at the end, not at the beginning. It's not like an article that someone's written.
Sometimes people put important or summary stuff at the beginning of messages. Sometimes it's before the first quote. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Um, yeah, I do that sometimes, but the particular reason I do it is to like try and avoid the problem that I myself like run into by replying too soon or things. Which is the same reason that I'd mention like might put something like main comments at the end. Um, and I find it somewhat difficult if I try and structure it differently so that the important stuff is up the top. Um, I think it's sort of what it sort of makes sense to me at the moment is that with a discussion, you should always presume that the important stuff is at the end before you know otherwise, and then that way you protect or you don't destroy methods of correcting mistakes by like replying to stuff early and whatever else, and you immediately know if you're wrong because the top is the first thing you read.
So discussions are very similar to chat. Like it is just text in chronological order, it's people talking. The real-time aspect doesn't fundamentally change it. The main thing about chat rooms is a cultural difference where people are more sloppy and stuff. And especially they're more vague about what the parents of their comments are. Whereas using short quotes or like tags to messages and stuff can help make more explicit what to reply to what.
Mm.
So it makes the tree structure a little more explicit. Chat rooms, discussions, it's still a tree structure. It's just less stated.
Mm. I wonder, like, one of the things that I'm not sure exactly how right this is, but seems to me like there's a lot of like the way that stuff is presented to people informs a lot of what is their like default response or method of using it. Maybe that's just like the what we've been trained to do essentially via social stuff. But uh, yeah, if you present stuff in certain ways, then you get different types of responses, or different methods of responding. Uh, anyway, yeah, I'm just thinking about like alternate ways you could structure a chat room to encourage more particular discussion, as opposed to uh, like the way that chat rooms tend to like it's really hard to have two conversations going in one chat room at the same time. Not impossible, but it's confusing sometimes.
I don't usually find it to be a problem to have multiple conversations, but I've noticed other people get lost or something. And yeah, people are pretty responsive to what they think the atmosphere or social expectations are. And a lot of the responses are very stereotyped rather than customized. Like they don't actually do a good job of paying attention to what's going on. They very roughly categorize it based on first impressions and then sort of stick to that.
Mm. Yep. Are people generally penalized for like changing their mind? Well, yeah, I was so just think about the way like interpreting what the cultural norms or something, guessing what they are, and then whether people get penalized for like changing that idea. Um, like whether we social stuff inhibits that sort of error correction.
So regarding the tree, I think even just from the bird's eye view, I think people often don't have a good idea of what their discussions look like. How many nodes are there? How many leaf nodes are there currently? Just basic overview of what's going on and how much detail and complexity is in their discussion. I think people often like forget a lot of it very quickly as they go along.
Yep.
And also they don't realize how many nodes they're writing. Like they'll write a message and then not realize that they just added 4 nodes to the discussion, not one. Or like they
Well,
don't quite know the difference.
yeah, I didn't realize like I didn't really I mean I could see some of these being like I guess charitably linked together into one node, but the reality is it's up to the respondent how many nodes there are in the sense of like what they're responding to. So it's sort of important for like someone if they're trying to have a good discussion to have an idea of what that reaction is going to be like and try to write for their audience essentially, um, not to give details that are going to distract or whatever else. That's sort of what it feels like at this
Yeah,
stage.
you can also try to help each other. You can try to figure out like what do I think their main point is? How can I group several things together and treat them as a group as making some main point and then respond to that? Um, you're sort of supposed to only respond to small details if they're relevant. Like, could this
Mm.
detail actually change the outcome, like the conclusion? And if it's a small detail that's not going to change the conclusion, then you just let it go and try to respond to the main points. But if it could actually change the result, then it's good to hone in on a tiny thing and respond to it. I run into a lot of trouble for 2 reasons, I think. One is that I respond to small things that I think are important or potentially decisive. And people seem to like assume that I'm being picky or pedantic or something, because they apparently don't understand why it's important and don't ask, which I find hard to deal with. Like if I'm responding to something and making a note, like I think it matters, that's why I'm doing it. I'm not just trying to screw with people or waste time or something. But they don't always seem to take it that way. And I think that that's because I pick up on importance that's like too subtle for them or that they don't realize.
Yep. One thing that occurs to me is, so often if someone says something that like is self-deprecating about me spending time with them or something like that, I sort of remind them that if I didn't want to spend time with them, I wouldn't. Um, and I think it's harder for people to, I'm not sure that people do that generally, like apply that sort of reasoning, that if someone didn't think this was important, they wouldn't respond to it or something like that. But it's a lot harder to apply that in discussions. Um, I think. I don't know. I'm trying to think of why, like, because it's sort of like people aren't taking the idea seriously that this is like an important disagreement that matters for the result. Is sort of
Yeah,
the impression
bigger
that I get by that
picture,
response.
they often, it's not quite real to them how much I disagree with them and how much like knowledge I have that's different than theirs, how much different background knowledge and like how thorough or built up of a worldview that clashes with theirs. They just sort of like they don't expect that to exist and they're blind to it and they don't even believe you if you tell them and so they if you don't acknowledge that context, then it's hard for to see how certain comments that look obviously not important could possibly be important. Like, because it makes sense if you acknowledge there's a bunch of different knowledge here, and then from that perspective, it could be important in some way I'm not seeing. If you assume they don't have a bunch of knowledge you don't have, and then it looks not important, then you're going to think, um, given that they don't know anything much that I don't, and it's blatantly not important, then it must not be important.
Yeah. One thing that occurs to me is that it's like part of the problem that's difficult and inhibits error correction here is that like you can't really say like I have lots of different knowledge and different ways of thinking. Like you can't, upfront say there's a large inferential distance, to use the LessWrong term. That's seen as condescending or something, pejorative. That inhibits the like ability to actually communicate though. Um, One thing that I have sort of thought, um, like in terms of uh, being a better thinker, should you expect to like agree more or less and with whom sort of thing? Um, and I don't think people really consider that like if someone's a much better thinker than them, they should expect that they disagree on a lot of stuff, and there's a lot of stuff that would surprise them because that's what like new knowledge is, right? I mean, it's new relative to them, but
Yeah,
it has to be somewhat surprising. And so, like, you should expect to have like much more difficulty in communicating with someone who's like way above you than someone who's, somewhere near your level, even if you're already, much better than
yeah.
average.
They generally don't expect anyone very good to be on a forum that they have access to. They expect social status gating to um, gate those people and or anyone who is actually good to be socially recognized that way by lots of other people already, which is not a very reasonable presumption. Our social status networks are not actually good at finding the best thinkers and giving them credit. Like there's actually sort of a meme about people being recognized for doing great work after they're dead.
Hmm.
That's happened to a lot of people.
Um, I think it's funny in that like the social gating type stuff, I'm pretty sure it like directly contradicts the other stuff about like, good philosophers, for example, like not being popular. Like I wouldn't imagine that Socrates was particularly popular. Obviously, someone came after him eventually, but um, he might have been well known, but I don't think that, people were like, oh, I can't wait to go hang out with Socrates again. Um, Yeah, and I don't know why that would ever be different for like the best people. Why they would ever be, I mean, unless we're talking about the best people at being popular or something like that, but that's, you know, contrived. Yeah, there are some like, you know, sort of ideas like diamond in the rough or whatever else for like finding great people on the
Hmm.
street sort of thing. Um, yeah, I don't know, I feel like they're related, not in any, particularly important way, but yeah.
Yeah, so other conversation issues. One is that people find my like expectations of them unrealistic, like that they would actually try or think seriously or maybe have bothered to read and try to understand books or something. Like they find that all too much to ask for usually, which I find a bit weird. Like if you're not gonna try, what are you doing with your life? But they sort of assume that like great thinking should be left to other people and that they're just doing a sloppy hobby. And so there's like a big mismatch on discussion expectations.
Yeah, I think it's one of the maybe differences. So that sort of attitude makes more sense with something like painting, right? As in, like, why would you expect me to, you know, produce, or put like huge amounts of effort into a painting? I'm just trying to follow a Bob Ross thing. Um, the sloppiness doesn't have like, in terms of painting, doesn't have like far-reaching consequences and doesn't like impact other things in their life, presuming that they, it's not related to stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
The thing is with
Thinking it's
painting, people will be honest about it. They'll say, I'm just an amateur painter. This isn't that big a deal to me. Um, but with the philosophy stuff, they don't want to say, "Oh, I'm just an amateur. My ideas are terrible. You should ignore me, and like you don't even need to debate me because I'm not really trying." Like they'll act like their ideas and their questions and their criticisms are important or true or whatever. And it's the dishonesty and the double meanings that are hard to deal with. But so like for example, I think it's perfectly reasonable that you start having a conversation and then an idea comes up and they don't know much about it, and then you just pause so they can read a book and get back to you. But this like almost never happens with anyone. They either refuse outright or they never get back to you, pretty much. Like you don't get these discussions over time where there's a 2 week break while someone reads a book and then you keep talking and so on.
I'm trying to think of counterexamples, and I've got maybe one or two. Um, so like I think people might do that, but only in really, really particular circumstances, like life-altering circumstances. Um, for example, like a really long-term relationship or like having a kid or something. So if someone's like, having a conversation with you about, say, parenting stuff, and they bring up some new idea, then, or you do with them, they might like be willing to go away and read a book and then come back to the conversation later. Um, Maybe with like some technical stuff, like in terms of someone's occupation as well. But those are things that are either like one of the most important things in our life, or something that we're doing literally every day, where we're already handling like 10 other things that we're doing asynchronously, um, or like on and off towards like a bigger thing. Um, People don't approach philosophy like that. It's more like a 3 hours after work, I'm just going to browse the web and then go to sleep, and there's no continuity to it like the other
Yeah,
things.
no one says, "Oh, since I don't know of a criticism of BOI's stuff about universality, I better read it and check, and maybe I'll agree with it, and I shouldn't assume the conclusion." The fact that no one on my side has published a criticism that I found adequate is actually meaningful. But most people are just like, "Oh, I assume someone else dealt with it," or like they just won't take responsibility. They don't want to worry about ideas that disagree with them.
Yeah, that strikes me as one of the things. So I was thinking the other day after we had or there was the FI thing, um, the bad thing I wrote. I started writing instead to try and figure out like a different angle, like why I thought it was different. Um, And anyway, I didn't write much there, but I think the biggest or the big thing that like made a difference to me was the idea that like it seemed consistent with BOI, and this idea that I'd sort of, I'm not sure if I had it before or whatever, but about uh consistency between ideas and taking that like really, really seriously. Like there is a deep commitment to not just the ideas, but also to finding the collection of ideas that are like explain the most and are the most like consistent with each other. Um,
Like
yeah,
system building, kind of.
yeah. Um, like I mean, yeah, I guess taking seriously the idea that like knowledge is well, you know, in this case, like is a system, and that these things need to like interoperate, and that stuff like, you know, morality and mathematics can have something to do with each other. Um, or like, you know, the fact that like epistemology is real in the same way other stuff is. That sort of thing. There was no, oh, I presume someone else has dealt with it. Um, that was, I think, a really significant aspect.
You mentioned how people find FI. The most common ways are via DD or Popper on the one hand, and via objectivism on the other hand. Most
Yeah,
most new people have some sort of connection to those.
yep, that makes sense. I replied. I'm just gonna go to the bathroom. Yep.
Okay, I replied.
Okay, cool. Stuff like this gives me like a little window into how big the gap is uh, between us / between you and everyone else. At least that I talk to. Whoops.
Yeah, that was part of the point, as I wanted do something where the gap would show up some and see how you reacted or took it or what happened, and if we ran into problems.
Um, yeah, no, I mean, it's I mean, I'm happy and glad about it in this moment. And I thought it was worthwhile mentioning. Uh, the From my point of view now, so it's one of these things. So I've taken a bit by surprise, and I've not just got to figure out what I'm going to say. I've got to make more choices about the direction to go in, um, which is something I don't usually do too much. Part of the reason that the conversation forks a bunch. Um, yeah,
Yeah, by the way, I think it would be good if you had conversations with other people and made trees for them as you went along. Um, to see if you could do them better or get them to work better or something by having better organization like that.
yeah.
I think
Trying to
that's
think of.
worth practicing.
Yeah, I agree. It's pretty obvious to me, especially looking at this, that I don't have a particularly good intuition for what this tree is without like doing it, and thus I make a whole bunch of mistakes, like introducing four nodes at once. Um, Even though that was like a short paragraph in the scheme of things, or sorry, a short reply, it was highly branching, which is different from like a long reply where like it's all in support of one thing. Um, that I think that's more reasonable. Um,
Yeah, I am, by the way, I basically know the whole tree intuitively in memory in discussions like these. Not like 100% perfect, but pretty close. Like I don't need to write it out. It's kind of automatic. And that causes a lot of problems in discussions because other people lose track of it and then we're not on the same page. And they think that their way of seeing it is sort of like the default or the expectation. Whereas I think like knowing what we said is makes more sense as a default. And like if
yeah,
you're losing track of things, say fewer things or reread or take notes or do I think it's people's responsibility to deal with that or to ask for help and say they're newbie and not very good at it and to establish that kind of context. But if they're trying to say they're a peer and also failing at that and not admitting it and so on, it causes a lot of trouble.
yeah. Um, did you do anything deliberately to get better at that, or was that something that like happened via other things as a side effect, or?
Yeah, not I didn't really do anything. It was more just having lots of conversations. And um so I did put effort into them and I did review them. I reread lots of things. I looked up quotes. Like I was actually paying attention and like so if you over and over go back and reread what people said when you think it might be relevant, you get better at remembering the relevant stuff. It's partly better like pruning, better knowing which parts are worth remembering. Because it's not like I really remember everything. Part of it is a better estimator for which things are important to remember,
Yeah.
and a better way of
Um,
organizing that.
so I find sometimes people will comment that I remember stuff in a great level of detail or something, and I think it's exactly that, in that I've just selected different stuff to remember. There's lots of details I don't. Um, One
Yeah.
thing I thought while you're saying that is, I'm not sure if you'd agree that like chess might play a bit of a role in helping to develop that, because of the way that that branches through like the next few turns. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, chess analysis, you do remember tree structure, move options in your head and try to keep track of it. So I do have that practice. And then on top of that, a lot of people are more visual oriented in their thoughts and memories and stuff, whereas I'm more word oriented, I guess,
Yep.
instead of images. So that works well with text conversation or verbal conversations as well. If
Yeah,
you're translating things into emotions or images, it's not going to work as well for having a logical conversation.
I suspect that's mostly a matter of like practice and what they expose themselves to. In that visual stuff is everyone has that, but you've got to spend more like time and energy to deal with things that are like language word level type thing. I'm yeah, I don't think people are like naturally better or worse at particular stuff, just that they've
I don't think it's
practiced.
natural, but I think some of it's done in early childhood and really hard to change.
I could maybe see that.
I think people could definitely make
Sure.
progress with significant practice now, but um, I don't think it's like sort of free. Like some people don't have to practice as an adult, and then other ones do because of past different choices.
Yep.
And so if you take that plus no one practices anything as a hypothetical, then you have like different types of people with different thinking styles, and they're just sort of stuck with it. And
Yeah. Um, One thing that I am sort of curious about when we like humanity figures out a bit more about the mind. So I learned the other day, there was I'm not sure if you're familiar with Steve Mould. He's like a science guy on YouTube. Um,
nope,
uh, he had a video about, uh, oh, he got popular, by the way, from something called the Mould effect, which was uh, like if you get like a long chain of steel ball bearings linked together and like have them in like a big container, and you drop them out and they start siphoning, then the chain like raises up significantly from the thing. Um, anyway, yeah, there was some popular YouTube videos on that. He had one recently about like our eyes rolling in the like pitch, yaw, and roll, um, and where it came from evolutionary and stuff like that. But one of the things he mentioned was that some I don't know, researchers of whatever descript tried to, or they trained people to voluntarily be able to roll their eyes, and apparently they got up to like 30 degrees of motion. I'm not sure if that's off the axis or whether that's 30 degrees in total. Um, but it's one of those things that without having like a proper explanatory system for how you would actually train someone to do that, apparently there was quite a complex setup. Uh, you wouldn't, I wouldn't imagine that someone would be able to do it just like looking in front of a mirror or something. Um, we have all these ideas that are like we acquire early, or that we don't know how we acquire them, and that are really difficult to change. I wonder if that will get substantially easier at some point in the future. Where we'll actually have techniques that we can figure that sort of stuff out, because it seems I think people would like commonly perceive that sort of idea as like unfair, that we end up with these ideas in childhood that we're stuck with that we can't change, that have big impacts for our life. That's like why the guy on LessWrong was so disappointed with his realizations, right? Or like felt so bad about himself.
yeah, I mean you can definitely start learning math at that point if you want to. It's more known how to learn than a lot of other things like curling your tongue or moving your pinky toe independent of your other toes. A lot of people are like really bad at that and have no idea how to do it. And I mean, if they just tried every day for 30 days in a row, they might figure it out. But people sort of like just give up really fast. They're like, I don't know how.
Hmm.
But there's lots of early childhood stuff like being homosexual.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We don't really have a theory of how or why that happens, right?
There are some theories. They're not like fully fleshed out. But there are ideas like picking up some of the gendered cultural stuff for the other gender.
I can imagine like Freudian type stuff has plenty to say on it, but obviously it's not very good. Yeah, obviously it's like oh sorry, not obviously, but given that the uh majority of academics researching that sort of stuff would probably be really horrified by the idea that this sort of thing could be an idea. Uh, yeah, I'm not surprised we don't have much idea in terms of what the nature of it is.
Oh, yeah, the other thing I was going to say earlier was one of the things that happens in discussions is I'll write a number of nodes or amount of text or whatever that I can handle. And then other people will sort of copy that, and then it'll very quickly spiral beyond what they can handle.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's hard to talk about that without being like condescending or insulting or something. But a lot of people do not self-manage discussion complexity to their own ability to organize and deal with discussions. And they sort of expect other people to do it for them. Like I assume that if I write a lot of things, they think, oh, he's just letting it get out of control. He's a lot of things are just going to get dropped. It doesn't matter, rather than thinking that I actually know what I'm doing. And yeah,
yeah,
it's awkward because I can drop stuff for their sake, but it's hard to do that unless they like admit what's going on.
yeah,
It's hard to do things for their sake on my initiative without them ever asking for it and without me saying I'm doing this for you, and just completely silently no communication. Because it makes it like really misleading about what's going on.
yeah. I think it makes even more sense in that light to like keep discussions highly focused by default, like down one branch. Um, it's safer for you and it
Oh
makes
yeah.
it actually approachable for other people, as opposed to while
Well,
I could
people
see if like there's agreement doing something else, but yeah,
people actually often quite dislike that. I tend to go depth first, and a lot of people focus more on breadth because they think that the depth stuff is picky, and that you should like try to stay as close as possible to the original topic all the time. Whereas I want to actually get something resolved, so I want to go down some narrow thing. And sometimes I just do one thing at a time and try to go down a narrow discussion path. And then people just don't like the discussion and don't want to have it. Even though it's something they could manage, they don't want to because they don't get to say their fancy, sophisticated, high level comments on the original topic. And the only thing that's going to get happen really if we go into a lot of depth on something is they're going to be wrong or get caught out or like make a mistake or make a logic error. Like I think they have some sense that no good will come of it for their side if they're going to have like a biased tribalist perspective.
mm,
It's not their skill set. They're not used to winning discussions like that. Like they don't want to go down a path that has never worked for them ever in the past. But they also don't want to admit that, they can't go into detail and ever win. And they don't want to
well,
be like neutral either.
I feel like it makes some sense for people generally to be doing that because the alternative is that, like, what discussions would they be having if every one of them ends up, like, and all the people that they talk to, they just end up saying, "Oh, we don't know about this." Like, they would have to, potentially acknowledge that and do something to
It's
change their life.
Yeah, what they think is sort of like you just have some partial discussions where you get a few bits and pieces, and then maybe you can learn something from it or integrate it into your worldview in some way. You just keep doing that. We have discussions that don't resolve anything, they just give you a few hints, and then it's sort of up to you what you do with it. And that's not a great model. It's not like completely the worst, but you have to be honest about what it is, which people aren't.
Yeah. That seems pretty accurate. It seems like a lot of what I did earlier on before I think I started to get better ideas. Um, And I think a lot of people do it. It's like when someone has like a fragment of like Buddhist philosophy thrown in because they like it or like how it sounds or whatever. Um, it's the analogy that occurred to me is like having 20 different jigsaw puzzles and just mixing and matching pieces. And so you've still got to sort of find stuff that fits together, but you don't necessarily get a coherent picture out the other side. You might get parts of pictures, but yeah, overall it's a bit of a mess, which doesn't really have an impact if you only look really closely at like particular stuff and don't take in the big picture. Um, and people can share individual like fragments like that and feel good about themselves or whatever they feel, as opposed to if every conversation ends with like, oh, I need to go read a book. I mean, they might actually, get much better at stuff doing that, but um, I don't think that gets them what they want. Like, it doesn't meet the goal of the conversation for them.
Yeah,
Oh
so
yeah,
another thing people do that I remembered is they'll say like I'm not good at logical debate, so if we go into all this depth, like I'm gonna lose the argument. But that doesn't mean my ideas are wrong. You just have a skill set that I don't have. And I think that kind of position is problematic because if you don't have that skill set, how do you know that your ideas are any good? Like, are you aware of someone else who does have that skill set who has checked the ideas? And if so, you can just keep referring to the literature to speak for you.
I think one mistake people make looking at that, or at least it feels like they might make this mistake, is to like they'll hear someone else having what they think is a decent debate or something or other, and they'll also like have a guess at what the idea is that person's trying to put forward, and so then they've got like an incorrect or some version of that idea, like a misconception of it, plus the presumption that they're good at debates, which maybe it's not. Um, and then from that, it makes it easy to see how they could conclude that like the idea is good, or like I don't have to be good at debates. I can do all this by proxy or something like that. Um, there's also the idea that like, oh well, I was convinced by this, so it must be okay. And I didn't think the same thing. I didn't think this beforehand, so I've made that mistake in the past.
A lot of times they have low standards, like they're convinced of stuff for reasons that I wouldn't accept because I have ideas to much higher standards. So they sort of don't believe me when I say that or something.
Mm.
Yeah, another
No,
thing
well,
when they can't debate the ideas themselves, then like if they're wrong, how are they ever going to find out? It's really bad for paths forward. If you're sort of like, well, even if I lose the debate, that doesn't mean I'm wrong. Like, well, what would mean you're wrong? What's if it's not losing the debate, what is it?
yeah, I think part of the reason people think that is that they think that being good at debating means that they need to be like aggressive or confrontational or something like that, um, as opposed to discussion and persuasion, like rational persuasion. Um, yeah, I think it becomes different, sort of, or you can think about it. It's different to think about if you think about it as like uh, discussion and rational persuasion, as opposed to 3 minutes aside verbal jousting.
The whole verbal jousting system and forums in general, there's a lack of like structure or any way to work your way up. Like with literal jousting, you can joust against like, some of the low tier knights, and then you win, and then you get to fight the next tier up, and so on. It's the same in like boxing or MMA. You can get matches with some of the newer people, and if you win, then you get to match someone a bit higher up, and so on, and you can work your way up to the top. And there's no system like that with debates, even of the 3 minute verbal jousting type. There's no way to just win a series of those and work your way up. There's no formal structure for that. Nothing like that works very realistically. Like you have to do that and also do social climbing at the same time, separate from what you do within the debates. Whereas
Yep.
if it's like boxing, you don't really have to do some sort of thing outside of the boxing ring. If you win all your matches in the ring, that's kind of enough. It doesn't really take much extra, like social networking. Like, you might get
Yeah,
some shortcuts if you social network, but you can just beat everyone up and you'll work your way up.
it's unambiguous in terms of like victory conditions. Um,
Yeah, but the verbal jousting, they should come up with some, scoring criteria and rules. There are attempts to do that in like debate clubs and stuff, but there's no sort of more world stage type ones on the internet that I know of with any sort of attempt at clear rules.
I think they run into the problem where uh, the only solution that people really know is like upvote downvotes type systems for it. Um, in that so people get into this problem if you ask like how do you know what the best arguments are or things like that. I mean they might say um, how much support it's got or one of those things, but people readily generally it feels like acknowledge that interpretations differ and people disagree on what's more or less important. And so they sort of say, oh, well, that can be ambiguous, so that doesn't solve the problem. So we can just ask everyone and tally up the results because no one can argue with the tally. Um, but that means that you're not judging correctness now, you're judging like popularity. Uh, and you
Yeah,
still get just all the other errors baked in.
if they don't know how to judge correctness, they should say that and take it seriously. Like, how did they pick sides themselves? If you don't have an objective method, you should sort of say, I don't know about all the issues. But so many people have favored ideas that they think are better, but then they don't do much effort to figure out and write down how they decided those ideas are better, what are their criteria, and how do we turn those criteria into general principles instead of single specific cases. Like, I don't see people working on that project very much.
Yeah. Um, it it feels like it sort of reduces to um, so we could have some criteria like puts forward arguments that aren't refuted. Um, and admittedly, the judge needs to, understand uh, like the idea of refuting a class of ideas and stuff like that. So that aside, um, there's if that was done and like followed through, um, sort of with integrity or consistency, um, we'd have like a lot more in terms of resolutions to social issues or scientific issues or stuff like that, like stuff that is commonly believed would have been eliminated. Um, I think I'm not sure if anyone really, maybe a few exceptions, but if anyone would really be able to like engage in something like that without having like a lot of their ideas disagreed with, such that it would be like it's a pretty big barrier for most people to get involved in something like that. They're not looking for that; they just want to win.
A lot of people claim that they're looking to be challenged and for different ideas and so on. So the dishonesty is a problem again.
Yeah,
I think what for judging, the better the debaters do, the easier it is to judge. Like, if you know what you're doing in the discussion, you can make it easier to tell whether you were right. Most discussions are hard to judge because both sides made a mess, and
yeah,
neither side knew. They didn't know any objective criteria for why their side is better than the other one. And so then the judge looks at it, and neither side could really present any coherent case for why they should win. And then it's hard for the judge to decide because they're both bad, and neither one should be viewed as adequate. But if someone actually goes into the debate with good ideas and knows how to present them, then there should be within the debate some clear points should come out, like you have no answer to this, or this is a refutation of this, or something that that shows who should win and then doesn't get any answer. That makes sense.
The other thing that occurs to me as well is there are more outcomes for a 1v1 debate than there are for like 1v1 sport matches. Um, like you could have a question like what's a win condition type thing. Um, and for something like a discussion, you can put it down to points or something, but I think that's a bit beside the point. A better thing is to like recognize stuff like there is actually like a win-win solution for both parties there. Like if both parties end up agreeing, then sweet. If one of the parties change their mind, then you can say like, okay, in terms of like a ranking, we can give more points to the guy who, or the person who convinced the other one. But ultimately, both people got better coming out of that. Um, both people end up like worse if no agreement is reached and they're unable to like come to a conclusion. If you've got a time limit, that's a bit unfair, perhaps. Anyway, yeah, this is not like a sport match where it's either win, lose, or tie. Um,
Yeah, but people, they want to like win rather than be the learner, and sort of admit the other person knew stuff they didn't.
um,
They're all trying to claim they're already really good and clever and so on.
that reminds me of the excerpt that between like a conversation on Discord between Justin and I, with the out of the loop comment and actually it being like a relative social status thing. I think that's what people are basically saying is it's not that they don't have a dedication to the knowledge, they have a dedication to their social status, and they think they want to express that via their discussion or via their ideas or whatever else. Um,
Yeah, I've
it-
found that the more decisive my arguments have gotten over the years, the clearer and getting to conclusions faster and so on, the less people want to talk with me. It becomes a larger threat to their social status. Whereas if it's more unclear and blurry and going on tangents and stuff, then they're more willing to talk because they can just say a bunch of stuff and it's not threatening.
Mhm.
But the more I've learned how to focus and find the key points, then people just stop talking way faster. Um, which is a notable thing about the world, if that's accurate about what people want and how they act.
yeah. Um, all right, just thinking about uh, finishing up today. Um, so I'm going to reply to this. I'm basically just going to say, like, I think these two things branch off, like the error and the other one branch off into like potentially separate discussions. Um, this is the main one on topic. I want to
Hmm.
think about it a little bit. So I'm basically just going to reply that, and then have separate posts about the post-mortem and the other curious thing. Um,
Okay,
we
yeah.
can, I guess, either we'll have this discussion or not throughout the week, and anyway, we'll pick things up again on Friday or Thursday
Yeah,
for you.
and you could try to have a discussion with someone else and make a tree maybe.
Yes, yep. Um,
Or do some reading maybe.
yep. I've yeah, read a bit more of the choice. I should really just finish it. It's like the audiobook is like 5.5 hours. I could just sit here this afternoon and finish it. So I should get that one
Yeah.
off the list at least.
Yeah, the other thing you could do is reflect on this conversation so far and what you think's going on or what it means, etc. Um, Try to learn something from it.
Cool. Um, okay, sweet. That sounds good. I'll see you in 4 days.
Yep, bye.